In a groundbreaking move, China has reached out to NASA to prevent any kind of a catastrophic collision between satellites. China National Space Administration has contacted NASA. It restricts NASA from using federal funds to cooperate with China or the Chinese-owned companies.
You're on the night shift at NASA, watching dots drift calmly across a screen. Most nights, those dots, satellites, debris, space stations, mind their own business. Then a message comes in, not from Europe, not from SpaceX, from China's space agency. We see a possible collision coming, they say. You hold still. We'll move. For the first time ever, China and NASA just coordinated a satellite maneuver to avoid a crash in orbit. Not in a tabletop simulation, for real. So, what actually happened up there? Why did China make the call this time? And what does this tell us about the future of space, cooperation, competition, and the risk of turning Earth's orbit into a junkyard? Let's break it down. For years, the pattern was simple. If NASA saw a dangerous close approach, what experts call a conjunction, they would send a note to China and say something like, "We think we might hit you. You stay put. We'll maneuver around you." That script flipped in early October 2025. At the International Astronautical Congress in Sydney, NASA's Director of Space Sustainability, Alvin Drew, revealed that just one day earlier, China's National Space Administration had reached out first. They told NASA, "We see a conjunction involving one of our satellites and one of yours. We recommend you hold still. We'll do the maneuver." It sounds like a small change in wording, but it is a huge change in power and trust, because it means three things at once. China's tracking is now good enough to spot the problem. China is confident enough to offer the solution, and NASA is willing to listen. So what is a conjunction, and why does it matter so much? A conjunction is just space speak for two objects in orbit passing uncomfortably close to each other. In low Earth orbit, satellites move at roughly 28,000 kilometers per hour. At that speed, even a paint chip can punch a hole in metal. A full-on collision between two satellites can shatter them into thousands of fragments, each one a tiny bullet that can hit something else later. NASA and other operators constantly run conjunction assessments using tracking data from ground-based radar and telescopes. If the predicted chance of collision rises above a certain threshold, usually a small fraction of a percent, they plan a maneuver. Here's the catch. If both sides try to dodge at the same time without talking, they can accidentally steer into each other. So the golden rule is simple. One moves, the other holds. For years, NASA was the one making that call. This time, China raised its hand first and volunteered to move. This moment hits even harder when you remember the recent history. Back in 2021, China complained to the United Nations that its Tiangong space station had to dodge SpaceX Starlink satellites twice in July and October to protect the astronauts on board. Chinese officials called that behavior unsafe and warned about the risk to human life. Around the same time, Chinese analysts worried publicly about huge constellations like Starlink and began planning their own mega-constellations with names like Guowang and Thousand Sails. These would add thousands more satellites to an already crowded sky. Now fast forward to 2025. Instead of filing a complaint after the fact, China spotted a potential problem and called NASA before anything went wrong. Same players, same orbits, totally different tone. That's the plot twist. The same rivalry that made orbit more dangerous is now forcing the rivals to talk. And orbit really is getting crowded. As of mid-2025, there were well over 10,000 active satellites in space, and that number is climbing fast. By late 2025, tracking data showed more than 13,000 active satellites and many thousands of dead ones, plus over 10,000 cataloged debris pieces big enough to track. SpaceX alone has launched thousands of Starlink satellites, with many more planned. Amazon is launching its Project Kuiper constellation. China is building Guowang and Thousand Sails. Add in military satellites, weather satellites, Earth observation fleets, and swarms of small CubeSats from universities and startups, and you get a sky that is starting to look like orbital rush hour. Every new satellite that goes up is one more thing that can be hit, and one more thing that can create debris if it breaks. In recent years, thousands of new objects have been placed into orbit, and thousands of new pieces of debris have been added. So when China calls NASA about a conjunction, it's not a weird edge case. It's a preview of a future where calls like this may need to happen every single day. There is another reason this moment is so unusual. American law. Since 2011, something called the Wolf Amendment has sharply limited NASA's direct, one-on-one cooperation with Chinese government entities. It was written into US spending bills to prevent NASA from using funds for direct cooperation with China unless Congress and the FBI sign off. That law does not stop multilateral data sharing or global safety standards, but it does make direct collaboration complicated and politically sensitive. So how did this coordination happen? From what has been reported, this was not a grand, long-term partnership deal. It was a narrow, technical exchange. China said, "We see this potential collision. We recommend you stay put. We'll move our satellite." NASA listened, ran its own calculations, and agreed. In other words, they found a way to prioritize safety without rewriting politics. It's more like two drivers flashing their headlights at a dangerous intersection than signing a peace treaty. To understand how big a deal this is, you have to know who watches the skies. Today, space traffic safety is a strange mix of military systems, civil agencies, and private companies. For decades, the United States military has used its space surveillance networks to track objects and send warnings to satellite operators worldwide. Those warnings help operators decide when to fire their thrusters and when to ride it out. Now, the US Commerce Department is building a new system called the Traffic Coordination System for Space, or TraCSS. It is a cloud-based platform designed to provide civilian and commercial operators with warnings about possible collisions. NASA has its own internal playbook for conjunction assessment and collision avoidance, laying out how to decide when to move, how far, and how to balance fuel usage against safety. China, for its part, has been rapidly upgrading its own space situational awareness, its ability to know what is happening in orbit at any moment. Chinese space policy papers have listed better tracking and debris management as national priorities, and officials have talked about developing technologies to remove debris. When China spotted this conjunction and picked up the metaphorical phone, it was a sign that its tracking capabilities have reached a level where it can not only protect its own satellites, but also coordinate with other major players. At this point, it is tempting to ask a big question. Is this the beginning of a space truce between China and the United States? Not quite. On the military and commercial side, competition is still intense. The United States, Europe, China, and other players are all racing to secure orbital slots, lunar access, and satellite markets. What this moment shows is something more subtle. Even rivals need rules of the road when they are sharing the same highway. Think of it like ships at sea. Countries can disagree on almost everything, but they still follow basic rules to avoid crashing into each other's vessels. In orbit, China calling NASA about a conjunction may be the first example of that kind of practical, safety-first cooperation between the two biggest space powers. You might be wondering why any of this should matter to you on the ground. Why should you care if two metal boxes almost bumped into each other hundreds of kilometers above your head? Because those metal boxes are how we navigate, communicate, and understand our planet. Satellites connect ATMs, power grids, airplanes, ships, internet backbones, and emergency services. They help us predict the weather and track climate change. And yes, they even help deliver videos like the one you are watching. A bad collision can create a cloud of debris that threatens not just one spacecraft, but many others in similar orbits. The more debris you have, the more chance of future collisions, a chain reaction known as the Kessler Syndrome. That is why NASA, the European Union, commercial operators, and now China are talking more seriously about space sustainability, how to keep orbits usable for decades and centuries, not just for the next launch window. This one phone call does not solve the debris problem, but it proves something important. When the risk is high enough, even rivals will coordinate to keep the sky from becoming a shooting gallery. So, what does the future look like if we jump ahead a few years? The number of satellites is expected to grow into the tens of thousands and possibly beyond, as mega-constellations expand and new players join the game. By 2030, it is likely that more countries will operate their own tracking networks. Global systems like TraCSS will be fully online, feeding collision warnings to operators around the world. New regulations, such as emerging European rules, will push operators to deorbit dead satellites faster and design spacecraft that are easier to remove or safely dispose of. In that future, quick, practical coordination, the simple idea of "you hold still, I'll move" will not be rare. It will be normal. The big question is whether China, the United States, Europe, and others can turn these one-off safety calls into shared standards and maybe even joint traffic rules for all of space. So, what did this headline really mean? China and NASA coordinate to avoid satellite collision is not just about two spacecraft missing each other by a few kilometers. It is about three big shifts happening at once. China is showing that its tracking and maneuvering abilities have leveled up. NASA is accepting a safety recommendation from a rival. And both sides are quietly bending around political walls to keep orbits safe. In a sky that is more crowded and more valuable than ever, this one phone call is a small story with big symbolism. If the world's biggest space powers can at least agree not to smash into each other, then maybe, just maybe, we have a shot at keeping Earth's orbits open, safe, and usable for everyone who depends on them. Because in space, as on Earth, the first step toward peace is often very simple. You see danger coming, you call the other person, and you decide together who moves.